What I'm going to do is I'm going to speak about Martin Luther King and how he was assassinated. Now, it's very complex. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read from my notes, and majority of it, I'd say about 90% of it, is based upon the civil lawsuit against Lloyd Jowers, who was the owner of Jim's Grill. Now, in Dallas, Texas. The case was Coretta Scott King, which was the wife of Martin Luther King, and it was also his and her son Dexter King that also was part of it, major part of it. But nevertheless, the case itself is called Coretta Scott King versus Lloyd Jowers. Excuse me about that. Was not Dallas, Texas. That was Memphis, Tennessee. Sorry about that. Anyway, Coretta Scott King versus Lloyd Jowers, District of Memphis, case number 97242 in 1999. It was before Judge James E. Swearingen, Swearengeen, Division 4. Now, 90% of what I'm going to speak about is from that case. And I read the entire transcript of that particular case. So I'm going to speak a lot about a lot of points, and then I'm going to delve into it and then bring it all together, put it in perspective, and have you understand who exactly did kill Martin Luther King. So right off the bat, in 1967, Martin Luther King pretty much opposed the Vietnam War before 1967, but he was not as confrontational to the United States government as he was starting on April 4th of 1967. And he opposed the Vietnam War. And Johnson / even Billy Graham were against Martin Luther King coming out the way he did against the Vietnam War. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Harold Swenson, Senson. At one time in the early 60s, he had he was in the backdrop. He didn't have a lot to do with Allen Dulles, but to a degree he did. He was very anti-communist. And Harold Swenson was the chief of counterintelligence of the CIA. He was on the special activities staff, and he retired in 1968. But also, Harold Swenson was the warden of Missouri State Penitentiary, where James Earl Ray had escaped. It was under his power, so to speak, under the warden Harold Swenson's jurisdiction. He was the warden at the time when James Earl Ray had escaped in the bread truck. And that was the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. So, like I said, I'm going to go through these points. They're it's very tedious, but you'll see at the end of the video, which is going to take a little while to do, if you bear with me, I'll bring it all into perspective and you'll understand it completely. There was another gentleman by the name of Merle McCullough. That's Marrell. The last name was MC capital C Ullough. Later on in his career, he became an agent for the CIA. This is after Martin Luther King had died. But during the time Martin Luther King was around, he was a military police. And he was in the 111th or 111th Military Intelligence Group, which is a very secretive group of the armed services, or the U.S. Armed Services. And he worked, this Merle McCullough, he worked with the Memphis Police Intelligence Division. And he was still reporting to the 111th Military Intelligence Group, which is basically the CIA. I mean, the CIA and the U.S. Department of Defense pretty much worked hand in hand. In 1974, he became a CIA agent. Before Martin Luther King was assassinated, Merle, I assume I'm pronouncing that right, I don't know, Merle McCullough, he met with 4 men at James Grill under the room. Now, you have to understand, I don't know if you ever seen James Grill in Memphis, Tennessee. You had the James Grill, which was, I think it was 422 South Main Street. And so you had James Grill here, and then on top of it, you had the rooming house, which was where supposedly James Earl Ray was in the bathroom there, in the boarding room, or the boarding area above James Grill that assassinated Martin Luther King. So anyway, meanwhile, Merle had met with 4 men at James Grill before Martin Luther King had died. So, and we'll get into the 4 men in a moment. Merle also had a secret operation. He was to infiltrate the Memphis invaders. Now, the invaders, that was pretty much it was like a Black Panther group, but was not as militant, even though it came across that way. They weren't really as militant as the media had played them as. But what they mainly did was they provided protection services for Martin Luther King anytime he was in town in Memphis. So anytime Martin Luther King was at a motel or wherever he went, or a gathering, a church, or whatever to speak at, the invaders pretty much protected him, made sure that they were like his bodyguards. And the invaders pretty much was not really a military. It wasn't like the Black Panthers or anything, but it was just more or less a bunch of black people getting together and trying to promote the civil rights effort, and not do it like the media had played them out to be as some bunch of military mongrels or something. They were mainly, though. Anytime the point is, as far as Martin Luther King is concerned, they were there mainly to protect him. And what happened was, this Merle McCullough, which is a secret agent, so to speak, he was an agent for the federal government in the, and he was with the Memphis Police Intelligence Division, and he infiltrated the invaders. He was a spy. He was a black man himself, and he made it appear like he was one of them, when really he was working against them all that time, taking all that information and giving it to the federal government. He was basically an informant, but he not only an informant, but he actually worked for the federal government. The groups that I'm going to speak about, mainly the people that were involved, the divisions or the agencies that were involved against Martin Luther King, not only for his assassination, but eavesdropping and infiltrating his group, his civil rights group and stuff like that, was the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, was a military intelligence group, United States Army, which is the Military Information Division, United States Department of Defense, Federal Bureau of Investigation, the National Security Agency. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, Hoover, the FBI director, was very, very anti-Martin Luther King, not only just because he opposed not only because he opposed the Vietnam War, but because Hoover didn't even care for the civil rights effort at all. He was a staunch communist, is what FDR in the 30s was a socialist, but Hoover was a communist, even though he made it appear like he was against communists. Believe me, he was a real communist. Real communist, this guy. Then the next guy in line, and this is when it starts to sort of get into a lot of the direct participants in the assassination of Martin Luther King, was, believe it or not, and this, which you'll see, this stuff ties into JFK. Why I say JFK and MLK are very hand in hand. That's why I put it together in the caption. Both these men. Also involved was Carlos Marcello. Now, Carlos Marcello was he was a part of the Trafficante Italian mob, who also was one of the participants in JFK's demise, and he was also a participant in Martin Luther King's demise through this gentleman by the name of, I don't know if I call him gentleman, but through this man named Raoul Mellon. Now, the media played it up like James Earl Ray made this like a fictional character up, but this guy actually does exist. There's news reporters, and I'll get to that, news reporters that actually spoke to this guy on the phone. He did actually exist. They actually visited his house. They actually even saw him through the door. This guy does actually exist, and his name is Raul Mellon, Mellon. And I'll get into the. Also, he's there was a woman, and I'll get into it. There's a woman that actually knew him down in Houston, Texas, in the 60s as well. So this person actually did exist, and what he was he was a gun runner. He came from Portugal, and he worked in the arms factory, and he would import guns, and eventually worked with the CIA to do the gun smuggling, like I said in the part 1. It was a lot to do with gun running, especially with Cuba, throughout Vietnam, etc. Anyway, this guy was one of the main components in Martin Luther King's death, with the gun running. He pretty much was the guy. He wasn't the ultimate planner, but he was like the go-between between setting up James Earl Ray, just like they set up Oswald with JFK. James Earl Ray was the Oswald. They're the same patsies. And Raoul was the one that was setting him up to make him appear that when after Martin Luther King dies or gets assassinated, that makes it appear that James Earl Ray was really the culprit, when really he was not at all. Actually, he was quite innocent. He was just like Oswald. He was a patsy. And So Raoul Melland, he was basically was a go-between between the CIA and the Italian mob through Carlos Marcello and James Earl Ray. I just want to look at my notes here. And one other thing about the invaders was the invaders where Martin Luther King was staying in Memphis, Tennessee, a couple hours, about 2-3 hours before he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. The invaders, and I will get into him, Reverend Kyle's a little later, but the invaders were told to no longer protect Martin Luther King, and that was just like 2, 3, maybe 4 hours tops, right before he was assassinated. They were pulled off the protection of the protection services. They were no longer needed. They were told Martin Luther King didn't need that protection, and that should have sent off alarm bells right there. But no one would think that he was being set up to die. And then there's another gentleman by the name of Frank Liberto, I guess. Frank Liberto. What he was basically a gun runner, and he would work hand in hand with Raoul, and it makes it appear that Frank Liberto, he was like a big shot, or he was the one in charge of the whole thing. But he was really just one guy involved in the plot to kill Martin Luther King. He was not the guy that did it. He wasn't the guy that set it all up. He wasn't the one that set it all up. But he was one of the guys that helped in Martin Luther King's demise. And there's a part in the civil lawsuit. I'm gonna quote this. And there's a gentleman. His name is Nate Whitlock, Whitlock. He was a witness, and he worked at this food market that Frank Liberto used as a front to do guns and money laundering and all that other crap. And he was a witness to what Frank Liberto said over the phone to somebody else on the other end. Quote, I didn't kill the nigger, but I had it done. Excuse me, real quick. This was actually said. I'll get to the phone conversation in a moment, but this was actually said in 1979 after it happened, after Martin Luther King had died. I'm looking at my notes, so sorry. In 1979, this is what Frank Liberto said to Nate Whitlock in 1979. This is Frank Liberto, I guess. Quote, I didn't kill the nigger, but I had it done. Ray wasn't nothing but a troublemaker from Missouri. He was a front man, a setup man. It was about the draft, and don't you say nothing. Unquote. So Frank Liberto pretty much discussed it, amongst others. And this Whitlock guy wasn't the only one that this guy talked to. I want to do something real quick. 1 second. Sorry about that. So these are the assassins that were put in place. James Earl Ray was nowhere in sight, actually. He wasn't even on the property. He wasn't even in the boarding room. He wasn't in the boarding house. He wasn't in the Jim's Grill. He wasn't anywhere at all. He was actually in a car. Well, I'll get to that eventually. The assassins that were involved in the Martin Luther King assassination, or these. Well, of course, the patsy is James Earl Ray. The assassins, let's say the ones that worked together to set it up, okay, was Merle McCullough, the one I spoke about. He worked for the U.S. Army, or U.S. Armed Services. Then you had a gentleman by the name of Johnny Barger, Barger. They have Lloyd Jowers. Lloyd Jowers was a... Funny thing is even though the civil lawsuit was against him, and they did find him through the preponderance of evidence, the jury did award the King family. It was only a nominal amount of money. It was like $100 they were asking for. But what they really were doing there, the attorney Pepper for the Kings, what he was really trying to do is try to bring out as much truth as possible. We get everything on the record is really what the aim of the entire civil trial was about. And they did a very good job of that, by the way. And Lloyd Jowers was really a minor player. If you really read his testimony, and he has, through his deposition, he has direct testimony, and then other witnesses and all. He comes across like he knows, like he was involved. You know, he was one of the assassins. You know, he was like, but he's really full of shit. Okay, he made up a story that he got the gun from the assassin and all this other bullshit. That's not even at all what happened. And I mean, he got the gun from the assassin, but I mean, there were other assassins that were involved. It wasn't just this one guy, and his name is Lieutenant Earl Clark, Clark. He was one of the guys that was put in place to make it appear that you know, he was one of the assassins, which his shot probably did may have killed Martin Luther King, but there were other assassins involved as well. To get the visual, they were on South Main Street between Mulberry. You had the I don't know if you know what it looks like, but you have the Lorraine Motel, which Martin Luther King was staying at. Then you had Mulberry Street, and then you had the Jim's Grill and the boarding house, and then you had South Main Street. And to the south, I guess it's to the south of, don't hold me if it's to the south or to the north, but anyway, if you're looking, let's say this, if you're at the Lorraine Motel and you look straight ahead and you're looking at the boarding house or the Jim's Grill, to the left of that, I don't know if that's south or north, but anyway, if you look to the left, they have the Memphis Fire Department. And the Memphis Fire Department had through the CIA and the FBI, but mainly the CIA, they had agents there in that fire department that was watching MLK for the whole day. Actually, for the whole time that he was in the Lorraine Motel. And they had agents that were on top of the roof of the fire department that appeared that they were photographers, but they were working for the CIA / military intelligence group, and they were also assassins. So you had a system that was set up that you had an assassin that was in the bushes behind Jim's Grill, and then you had a couple assassins on top of the roof, the fire department. So no matter who shot him, he's going to die. One way or another, he's going to die. And so that's what happened. I mean, if the guy in the bushes didn't kill him, the guys up on top of the roof would have took him out. They made sure that the plan was set that Martin Luther King would die. By whose bullet? Who knows? But all that mattered is that he was going to die that day, and that was it. That was all there was to it. So on the Memphis Fire Department Station Number 2 had a police intelligence surveillance operation close to the Martin Luther King Motel. And one of the two gentlemen that were part of that intelligence operation was Officer Edward E. Redditt, R-E-D-D-I-T-T, and Willie B. Richmond, R-I-C-H-M-O-N-D. They were both black men. And toward the latter part, around like sometime in the afternoon, they took Redditt off of the surveillance, and the only one left there was Richmond and the fire chief. I just want to look at this real quick. There were accusations that Jesse Jackson, who was also present, had something to do with it. I don't know if Jesse Jackson had a lot to do with it, but there was a Reverend. What was his name? Let me see if I can find him. I don't want to say his name wrong. There was a Reverend Samuel Kiles, or Reverend Samuel Billy Kiles, which he had a lot to do with, unfortunately. And he was a black man. He was a reverend who knew Martin Luther King from the 50s. And for whatever it may have been, whatever the payoff was or whatever the conflict was, he turned his back on Martin Luther King. It could have been that they pressured him, or they talked to him, or I don't know what they did behind closed doors, but nevertheless, this Reverend Kiles actually turned on Martin Luther King. He was actually the one that told the invaders, by the way, you're not needed as protection for Martin Luther King. And I'll get to his testimony in a moment to show that he was definitely directly involved with the assassination of Martin Luther King. And he was a black man himself, this Reverend Kiles. So, and also, just as a tidbit, Lord Jowers was a former police, a former Memphis Police Department police officer. A lot of these had to do with police officers, so there was a blue wall of silence amongst themselves. But it wasn't actually the local police that took out Martin Luther King. Now, a lot of people might say that's the case, but that is not the case. The people that took him out were. They may have been former police officers, don't get me wrong, or former lieutenants, or even a lieutenant like Earl Clark was a lieutenant of the Memphis Police Department. But they had direct connections with the military intelligence groups or the CIA. They had direct connections with them. So. There's a lot of local police in the Memphis Police Department at the time that had none of those connections. It's those connections that matter. You understand? Who takes those orders? You understand? Just like in JFK. It's who takes those orders and then follows through on those orders. So there's other names here, but I want to pretty much stick with and real quick, a lot of people say, well, why did James Earl Ray plead guilty? Well, for one thing, he was never placed under oath. The judge never placed him under oath when he was told his rights. But the judge was telling him his rights before he pled guilty. By the way, all these things, you won't be afforded a trial, you won't be afforded appeal, all this other stuff. But he was never under oath. As pointed out very clearly in the civil trial with Attorney Pepper. He was never, ever placed under oath. So his guilty plea was moot. Understand? It was null and void because he was never under oath. The other thing is he was coerced into pleading guilty. He would have gotten some money, a lot of money, about $100,000 or more. And he would also, what he also did was he pled the Alford plea, A-L-F-O-R-D. And what that is you plead guilty, but you're not guilty. You don't incriminate yourself when you do that. So you're pleading guilty, but not really guilt. Let me bring that up real quick, so I can really tell you what that is, what that means. An Alford plea is a guilty plea of a defendant who proclaims he is innocent of the crime and admits that the prosecution has enough evidence to prove that he is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So he says he's innocent of the crime, but he was told by his attorneys that maybe there's a lot of evidence to put him away, or he's going to get the electrocution, which was the he had also the deal was if he pled guilty, he wouldn't have electrocution. He would just have 99 years in prison. So he was pretty much coerced by his attorneys into that guilty plea. But the key of that all is, regardless if he was coerced or not, he was never under oath when he pled guilty. So that right there makes the entire issue of pleading guilty moot. It becomes a non-issue. I mean, that's enough to open up the whole case, but of course he's passed on, so it's too late. Now I'm skipping over some stuff because I want to sort of get into bring all the strings together so you see things. Now, Raoul, and a lot of people make it out like Raoul was like the main guy. Well, for one thing, he didn't actually assassinate Martin Luther King, but he had a lot to do with setting James Earl Ray up. His main thing was to like, for instance, an example, he got, I'll go back a little further. Warden Harold Swenson, which was part of the CIA in the early 60s with JFK, became the warden of the Missouri Penitentiary, the state penitentiary, where James Earl Ray was staying at. And Harold Swenson pretty much sized him up and said this would be a perfect patsy for everyone. So what they did is they made it very easy for him to escape. I mean, he was on the run for over a year before he was caught for the Martin Luther King, supposedly the assassination. He's all over the country, not just one place, all over the country. Of course, he uses aliases, but still, he's all over the country. And he goes to Canada, all these places, right? So, Harold Swenson, who was CIA at one time, just a few years earlier, made his escape very easy. Because James Earl Ray had escaped before from other prisons. So, Warden Harold Swenson made it quite easy for him to do so. So, he was, once they got him out of prison and he escaped, then they set the guy up completely. And that is to Raoul. Raoul followed him or took him all the way into Canada, and they plotted together. But James Earl Ray always thought they were running guns or running money laundering or drugs or whatever the hell have you. And they went to Canada, they went to Indiana, they went to Chicago, they went to Tennessee, they went to Texas, they went to Mexico, they went to Atlanta, they went to, there's other, I think even Florida. I mean, they went all over the place. But what they were doing is they were setting James Earl Ray up by putting him in all these different places and getting him in that kind of mindset of feeling guilt over something or another. And so when the Martin Luther King thing came up and he realized he was in hot shit because what happened was, the other thing is, right before, it was just like 2 hours before, Martin Luther King was assassinated at 6:01 on April 4th, 1968. And around 3:30 p.m. that same day, Raoul had brought James Earl Ray up into the boarding room and he got him to put his belongings there. He got him to buy the rifle with his prints all over it, and he got him binoculars. He has prints all over it. And so what Raoul was what his role was to plant all his fingerprints and his belongings and all that shit, that is James Earl Ray stuff, all over the place. Put it in the boarding house, put it in the bathroom, put it in here, put it in there. He actually got James Earl Ray to look around upstairs, so he saw the bathroom, he saw this, he saw that. He saw all this shit. So, but the point is, Raoul was able to plant him in that same place where they said the assassin was at. See, and that was the key to Raoul. That's all. Raoul was not the assassin. He was just the guy that planted all the evidence that was used against James Earl Ray to make James Earl Ray appear that he was the culprit, that he was the assassin. That was the only thing that Raoul did. I mean, he did other stuff. He was into gun running in the early 60s for governments. But when it came to Martin Luther King, his main role, his only role, was to plant evidence that James Earl Ray was involved with, his fingerprints and everything. And he actually got James Earl Ray to buy a rifle. And he had fingerprints all over it and everything. And was up there in the boarding house. He just planted everything. And that was the only role that Raoul had played in the Martin Luther King assassination, was to plant all this evidence, put all this evidence in place, to make it appear that James Earl Ray was the guy that assassinated Martin Luther King. So anyway, but this is Raoul's history. Okay, I just want to sort of briefly speak to his history. He was born in Lisbon, Portugal. He worked up until 1961 at the arms factory making weapons. Raoul was in the sale of weapons. Raoul came to the United States in 1967. He was naturalized. His date of birth was July 16, 1934. United States of America, number 8920111, without a certificate of naturalization, signed by the clerk in the Supreme Court of the State of New York. Serial number of Portugal passport 760529, issued on December 5th, 1961, expired on April 4th, 1962. Passport number 18425/1. Number 18425/61, expires November 15th, 1963. Worked from October 1957 to December 1961 at the National Factory of Arms, Lisbon, Portugal, as a mechanic assistant. Reason for leaving: left for America. The correct name of the business was Fabrica Nacional. I can't do any Spanish, so I'm going to have to bear with me. I'm going to just spell it out. It's Fabrica, and the next word is Nacional. Next word is Municoes. Next word is ARMAO. And he was also a clerk in the office who did all the paperwork on shipping arms. His New York State Liquor Authority wholesale beer license, effective July 1st, 1992, expires on June 30th, 1993, certificate number D, like in dog, 240634. So his main thing was in the gun running, and that's part of the thing that he wound up doing with James Earl Ray. Because James Earl Ray, he was a petty thief. You know, he pretty much followed orders. He was involved in an armed robbery at one time in a bank, but he probably, if you understand his personality, as you read all the papers, all the documents, you realize that this guy, and he worked with another guy when they armed robbed the bank, he was pretty much taking orders from this leader that also robbed the bank with him. It was like, between the two of them, the pecking order was James Earl Ray was following the other guy. If you understand James Earl Ray's mentality. Not that he's perfect or anything, and he is a con, and he can change things around a little bit for his favor. But when it comes to Martin Luther King, this guy was innocent as a lamb. This guy was led astray by Raoul and all those that were involved. So, let me see. As I go on, there's other things in here, but I don't really need to get into too much. Now, the next thing is I mean, there's a few notes there, but I'm gonna sort of go over it because I don't want this video to be, an hour and a half. I really just want to get to the main points. On April 4th, 1967, when Martin Luther King came very direct, he was very direct with his wordage as far as the Vietnam War. He became very direct confrontation with the federal government and opposed the Vietnam War. On April 4th, 1967, the same day, President Johnson and Martin Luther King, their communication stopped. They no longer had communication. And at that time, before that time, Johnson was pretty much supportive of Martin Luther King. And it's rather interesting because when that communication stopped is when the plot to kill Martin Luther King started to work. Because around that time period is when James Earl Ray escaped, quote unquote, escaped from the Missouri State Penitentiary in 1967, just around the same time. That's when the plan was hatched to kill Martin Luther King, was back on April 4th, 1967. And thereon, after that time period, they put that plan into place. Took them a year to figure it out, but they did. There was also another little thing that was going on. There was a sanitation workers strike, and also in the latter part of March of 1968 and the early part of 1968. And Martin Luther King, that was the reason why he was there in the first place, was to support this sanitation strike, the sanitation workers strike. And everything was done peacefully. Even though the media will say people broke windows and shit like that, but that was government doing all that bullshit. that was like plants. You know, that's all bullshit. Martin Luther King was pretty cool guy. I mean, if you really, I mean, I never really I always liked him, but I never really understood him until I read the civil trial transcript, and then I got a real good idea who he was as a person, as a man. And he was the kind of guy that had a heart, and he cared about, especially about the black man. I mean, he cared about everyone, but he cared mainly about his own people, and like anyone else would, and about their own people. And he didn't believe in violence. He didn't believe in anything physical. What he believed in was the power of the people. It's sort of what I sort of believe in, like when I talk about unionizing and stuff like that in my other videos, and power of the people. I also 100% agree with Martin Luther King that it's the power's in the numbers. If everyone unioned, or became a union, so to speak, or came together, you get a lot of things done in America. Unfortunately, these days especially, they're all divided, self-centered, and all that other crap. So Martin Luther King was very much civil rights. He was definitely into a civil kind of protest and marches. And so he was there for that. And then also the other thing that was going to come down the road after, but unfortunately they assassinated him, but what was going to happen was, I think it was in June or something like that of 1968, somewhere in there, he was going to have this huge protest of hundreds of thousands of people in Washington, D.C. They were going to set up a tent city. I mean, they wound up doing it anyway, but of course Martin Luther King wasn't there. But they were going to set up a tent city and have a huge protest until things changed with the Vietnam War as well as the civil rights. They were going to just hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have a quote-unquote sit-down in Washington, D.C. until they actually force the hand of the government to do what's right by the people. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, at least not with Martin Luther King. So a lot of the steam of that whole concept of the tent city sort of like went like that. Because Martin Luther King was becoming from the federal government's point of view, he was becoming a threat. Not in any bad way, but from the federal government's point of view, it was a bad way. Because if people listened to Martin Luther King and acted upon what he said to do, which they were very much doing when he was alive, especially right before he passed on or was assassinated, the federal government would have a lot of problems. He was massing millions of people behind him for his cause, and they were never physical, never violent, or any of that. I mean, you might have one or two little things that happened, but that wasn't because of Martin Luther King. That was some guy that got something in their heads to do something stupid. Martin Luther King would have done peaceful. He was into the numbers. The more people you have come together on one cause, you get things done. He was a very smart, intelligent man. He cared. He cared, and he was smart enough to do it peacefully. And that's what the government couldn't handle. They would have loved Martin Luther King to pick up a gun or something like that, but he didn't do that. He didn't do that. Of course, I think he had. I read somewhere he had a gun for his own protection, but that was about it. But I mean, he never used it. Understand? And that's what the government would have loved to have him do. The media would have smeared his ass all over the place, and they would have thrown his ass in jail. But they could never get anything on him. So they took him out. So you had the sanitation workers strike, and then you had that tent city thing, and everything's starting to brew more and more in favor of Martin Luther King, and that even gave the federal government even more reason to kill him, outside of his opposition to the Vietnam War. And Edgar Hoover of the FBI in 1967 said that Martin Luther King was the number one enemy of the country. I mean, this is a fucking asshole. Hoover, I mean, he was a staunch fucking communist. This motherfucker. Oh man, he was a dictator. What he was. He did whatever he wanted to do. He's a real dictator. He says took the Fourth Amendment and pissed on it. He took the Fourth Amendment and stuck it up his ass, along with the First Amendment, stuck it right up his ass, and shit it out. Hoover was he had no place being in America. He should have went to China or somewhere like that, or Russia or something, or Cuba. That's where this actually belonged in the ground. But besides that, that's where he should have went, because he was a real fucking communist motherfucker. That's what that fucking Hoover was. And in Memphis City got a court injunction against the marching from April 2nd to 3rd in 1968. Now this is like 1 or 2 days before the assassination of Martin Luther King. Memphis City got a court injunction to stop them from protesting the sanitation workers' strike. So that's the reason why Martin Luther King also, they were all in the process there in the afternoon there on April 4th, 1968, of trying to get that court injunction overturned. And just as a side note, like I said, Jesse Jackson didn't really have too much to do with it. But just to say, Jesse Jackson and Lord Jowers were never interrogated by the FBI or the local police, by the way. Neither of them were. The FBI, didn't even interrogate freaking Jesse Jackson. He's standing there right next to Martin Luther King. So that raises a little bit of alarm bell. Maybe he had something to do with it. But I don't think it was Jesse Jackson so much. He might have overheard something, maybe. But that's about it. It wasn't really him. It was that fucking Samuel Kiles, which I'll get to in a moment. He betrayed. That Reverend Samuel Kiles is the one, and he's still alive today. He betrayed Martin Luther King. He didn't kill him or anything, but he didn't help him out either. He just turned a deaf ear to him. Like I said, I don't know how they coerced him or whatever. The federal government probably coerced him or whatever, or told him something and then did something else. Who knows? But nevertheless, he betrayed. He betrayed Martin Luther King. And there's a lot of other little things in it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I wrote down. I wrote down. I had 13 pages of notes. Then when I was reading the 13 pages of notes when I was reading actually more than that, because it was double-sided. So I have over 20 pages of notes that I took down when I was reading that civil lawsuit, the King family lawsuit. But I don't. There's a lot of things I can get into, but I don't really need to get into too much, actually. I mean, I can get into details, and I might, what I might do is actually, I may just do this, is scan these notes into a file and see if I could put that somehow or another. I'll put that maybe into a Word document and then copy and paste it into the bottom of the video, so you could see all the notes I took, and then you could take a look at all the notes, and that way you get an idea of all the little details that are a part of the whole thing. There's a lot of detail here, and I was going to go through all the details, but really don't need to get to it too much, because I will tell you in a moment who assassinated him. And but there's something I wanted to get into which was very crucial to the whole thing. And you have to understand the Pentagon to the Joint Operations Command, 20th Special Forces Group, operated in Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana in the 1960s. They all had to do with this. It was a military operation. It was actually a CIA operation. That's who took out Martin Luther King. And then the FBI just closed down the investigation. Like the FBI didn't interrogate Jowers or freaking Lord Jowers or Jesse Jackson and others like them. But yeah, I'm going to put these notes on the bottom of that. I don't want to, I mean, there's a lot of little detail that I can get into. And I might elaborate on it in another video as like maybe a part 3. But it's something I want to get to right quick. And I think I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it up on computer because I word and these things I'll put in the on the bottom of the let me find this. Wait here 1 second. At the bottom of the video. But let me just find it here. It's here you go. Now this is Reverend Samuel Billy Kyles. This is his testimony. Now I'm going to read his testimony word for word. It'll take me about 5 minutes to do it, but this is very good. And this is by Miss Atkins. She's one of the attorneys. And they're talking to Kyles. Who was he? You said, only as I moved away so he could have a clear shot. And I want to know who he was. Who was the person that you moved away to give him a clear shot? Kyles. In the conversation, I was talking about James Earl Ray. Question. Okay, 1 second. Just to make sure there's no confusion. You moved away so James Earl Ray could get a clear shot. Kyles. Only as I moved away, I don't think he wanted to risk shooting the wrong person, whoever shot him. Question. Okay. Answer. And since we both were standing there, we're both African American men, he wanted to be sure that he hit the right. The problem we thought if he had kept shooting, he could wipe out the whole staff because they were all exposed. All of us were exposed. Question. So you're moving away so that he could answer. And this is Kyle's. My moving away had to do with going to get in the car to go to my house for dinner. That's what my moving away had to do with. Miss Atkins. Okay, I have no further questions. And this is the redirect examination by Mr. Garrison. And Mr. Garrison was the attorney for Lord Jowers. Question. Reverend Kyles, let me ask you this, sir. In referring to the statement that was just seen, you said, so he could get a shot. You're referring to James Earl Ray. That was your Kyles, yes. Question. Thinking, wasn't it? Kyles, that's who I was referring to, yes. Mr. Garrison, that's all. Thank you, sir. And what he said there, that's direct testimony from the real life testimony. This is a King family lawsuit. Thing is what he's saying is, only as I moved away. Now this is very key to what's going on here. This is Kyle's quote. I don't think he wanted to risk shooting the wrong person, whoever shot him, unquote. Now, if you understand the visual there, they're up on the second landing there, on the second floor landing. And Martin Luther King is there talking to the chauffeur, the driver, Jones, and Samuel Kyles is standing by him, and There's a couple other gentlemen there as well. But anyway, when 6 o'clock came along, that was the time period that was going to go down on. That they had to have MLK out there on the balcony. It was around the 6 o'clock mark. And so here's Kyles. He's standing there by Martin Luther King. And right before the guy shoots, he steps away from Martin Luther King because he wanted to give a clear shot to Martin Luther King. Now, this is his testimony. This is his own testimony. Why he admitted this, I have no idea, but he did. Its own testimony, its own paper, its own record for the public to read. What he's basically saying is he knew Martin Luther King was going to get shot. He was getting out of the way so he wouldn't get shot. You understand? And Reverend Kyles had something to do with it. He definitely betrayed Martin Luther King. Definitely. For what? I have no idea. Maybe he wanted to be the big shot on the block. Maybe he was sick and tired of always having Martin Luther King always getting all the hey, yeah, cool, Martin, yeah, Martin, we love you, man. Maybe he was sick and tired of hearing that all the time. And, Reverend Kyles was like, hey, wait, hold it here, give me a little positivity here. I like to hear my name up in lights a little bit too. Maybe. I don't know how his career took off after Martin Luther King died, but I bet you all the money in the world, it fucking took off like a motherfucker. He was with the Southern Christian Conference League or whatever. And I'm sure this is Martin Luther King was with that Southern Christian Conference League or whatever it's called. But anyway, the thing is he betrayed Martin Luther King for whatever it may be. But he betrayed him. He got out of the way so they could have a clear shot because freaking Reverend Kyles didn't want to get shot himself. I mean, if he was a real guy, if he was really loyal to Martin Luther King, he'd step in fucking front of Martin Luther King to take the shot. But he didn't. He stepped away from him. Because he wanted, as his testimony says, he wanted to give a clear shot. And they did. They shot him. They shot him right in the fucking heart. Pretty much died instantly. Knocked his ass back. His legs were up on the fucking railing. He was out. And then who comes onto that balcony? Merle McClure, who was the spy or the informant of the invaders. And he was there. He was the first one to kneel next to Martin Luther King to check his pulse or whatever. Who knows? He probably fucking... he probably made sure he was fucking dead. That's all he was there for. Make sure he was dead. He was a CIA agent eventually, but he worked for the military. He was a special agent for the military, for the 111th Military Intelligence Group. You get in the picture? There's a military operation. It was a CIA operation. These people wanted him down, out, dead, because he was getting a little bit too much power. People were starting to act on what he says. He opposed the Vietnam War. He was for the sanitation worker strike. He was going to do this tent city in Washington, D.C. People starting to follow him. He was starting to mass hundreds of thousands, if not millions, tens of millions of people behind him. You know what kind of power that is in the numbers? The federal government wants you divided, confused. Martin Luther King was bringing people together. The federal government can't handle that. That's just like what I was saying in the other video. If you have 205 million people don't pay the federal income tax on April 15th, they'd have to turn the 16th Amendment inside out. They'd have to turn it. They'd have to make it null and void. Just like I said, they passed the 16th Amendment in 1913 with the majority of the people. They can make it null and void with the majority of the people. That's the beautiful thing about amendment. Just like a fucking prohibition, right? They had liquor, then they prohibited it, then they had liquor. It's the will of the people. It's all in the will of the people. That's all it is. I used to have a friend years ago in the 70s tell me, if there's a will, there's a way. It's the will of the people. And that's what they were scared of. The federal government was petrified. They were horrified at the fact that Martin Luther King was gaining this type of power. People were acting on him, acting on his words, doing what he says, and all done peacefully, all in the name of the law, all in the name of what was right. Everything was done legally. They had to take him out. They had to take Martin Luther King out to put the brakes on what he was doing. That's why they put his ass down. That his own friend from the 50s, from his own reverend associate, betrayed his ass. Betrayed him. You might as well just take a knife and stab Martin Luther King in the back, because that's pretty much what he did when he stepped aside to give that clear shot to kill fucking Martin Luther King. They killed Martin Luther King because they were afraid that he was gaining too much power. And he was a good man. He was a good man. He was a good man. And they fucking killed him because he was a good man. And that's just, it chokes me up, but that's fucking wrong. But that's the kind of power the federal government has. That if you get too much power, too much, one man gets too much power, they're going to take your fucking ass right out. But if, on the other hand, if you have 205 million Americans doing something at once, it'd be very, very difficult for America to do anything, American government, federal government to do anything to you. That's the beauty of my intelligence. But anyway, so, I mean, I could get into other things, but to sum it all up, what happened there was this. I don't even need my notes, but I will scan the notes into a Word and then Word document and put it up underneath the video. What happened was Martin Luther King opposed the Vietnam War, and he was getting a lot of people behind him that acted on his words to believe what he believed. Federal government couldn't handle that. President Johnson turned a blind eye to it, or turned a deaf ear to what was going to happen from April 4th, 1967. And the FBI, Hoover, hated, despised, abhorred Martin Luther King. Abhorred him. And CIA was given free rein. They were given the green light to go kill Martin Luther King. And so they put the plan in place. They had to have a patsy. Well, I explained James Earl Ray's why he was set up as the patsy. Harold Swenson, former CIA agent, now a warden of the Missouri State Penitentiary. They found their man. They figured him out psychologically. They planted his ass right in the middle of assassination. They got their patsy. Just like they had Oswald. Understand? You had 2 sharpshooters on the roof of the Memphis Fire Department. He had 1 shooter in the bush behind Jim's grill. And one of those guys going to take his fucking ass out. Was going to take fucking Martin Luther King out. Didn't matter which one. Didn't matter which one. Long as he goes under. Long as he dies. So the first shot rang out. That came out of the bush from Earl Clark. But that was a conspiracy. There was 2 other sharpshooters on top of that roof. Were CIA agents. Part of the military intelligence groups. And so was Earl Clark, was also intelligence, part of the military intelligence group. Had nothing to do with the police department. Had nothing to do with police officers. That's what the media, the media, that they give it to the media and the people not know what the fuck's going on. That has nothing to do with the police. It had to do with the police officers don't have that type of power to do that kind of stuff anyway. Even in those days, they didn't have that type of power. This shit came from the CIA, from the federal government, that gave the green light on it to take his ass out. That's who has that kind of power, to plan that, and then to pull it off, and then to have one guy who didn't know what the fuck was going on, James Earl Ray, be the patsy. Everyone else got away. Just like JFK. Just like JFK. They put it all on Oswald. Everyone else got away, right? Everyone else got away. And it keeps you guessing and wondering what the fuck's going on. Well, Martin Luther King was Earl Clark that fucking took his ass out. That's who took him out. But he wasn't the only one that was involved. If his bullet didn't do it, the other 2 would have. The other 2 on top of that roof would have took him out. All because he was gaining a little too much power. Power of the people. Or better yet, the will of the people. The federal government can't handle the will of the people. They're actually afraid. Every day, every second of every day, the federal government, even today, which is June 4th of 2015, at 11:10 p.m., even this second, the federal government is afraid, lives in fear continuously of the will of the people. Of the will of the people. They're afraid of that. And if the will of the people decide, as a collective whole, to change things, the federal government's fucked. And that's what happened with Martin Luther King. That's what happened with JFK. JFK didn't want the war. They took him out. Martin Luther King spoke up against the war, and people were growing in numbers in favor of Martin Luther King. They took his ass out. And that's what happened. The CIA operation. Same names, same faces in both cases. Harold Swenson had a lot to do with it. Had a lot to do with the planning of it with the CIA. He was with JFK. Though he played a very minor role with JFK, but still he was still in John F. Kennedy's or John Fitzgerald Kennedy's administration, and that he was the warden at the Missouri State Penitentiary that let out James Earl Ray and set him amok with Raoul to plan all the evidence. And that's what happened. And his own brother, so to speak, not literally blood brother, but brother as a soul brother or whatever blacks call each other, people that are close-knit, of their own people, Reverend Samuel Billy Kyles turned or betrayed his fellow man or his best friend he sat in meetings with and everything since the 50s, marched with him and everything, he turned his back on Martin Luther King. Maybe he wanted the prestigious awards. Maybe he wanted to have the limelight. Who knows? I'm sure it was very self-centered what he did there. He had his own personal reasons. And maybe he was also coerced. Who knows? And Martin Luther King was just out there in the wind. Open season. Open hunting season. And they took his ass out. So anyway, that is my 2 videos on John F. K. and MLK. You guys have a good day.